I was thinking before this morning, I spent about 10 years caring for my mom who was living with Alzheimer's disease. And the first, I'd say 3, she was still communicating verbally like she always had for the most part. And then things started to change more and more. And while she was still verbal, it was maybe, let's just say, a little bit more difficult for me to track what she was trying to say. It was harder to have a conversation. And then as
Right.
time went by, words came less and less, right? Until the end when there really weren't any words. And I, in that process, no shade to myself here, but I, in that process, lost the plot a little bit and thought no words equals no communication.
Right.
I know now, thankfully I learned then, but know now that that's not the case. So I guess what's your opening take on just sort of communication in general when you're with someone who's living with dementia?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and it's something that comes up so much for us as the care advocates and in our support groups. When I think of language and words, especially, it makes me think of when we travel. So, have you ever traveled to a place where a different language is spoken? So, imagine that this is what it's like for people with dementia. So, I'm going to be kind of starting from the perspective of the person with dementia. Over the progression of the disease, the words they hear make less and less sense. And eventually it sounds like a foreign language. So from their perspective, the communication in the form of words gets very confusing, embarrassing, and there's no way that they would want to admit that, right? So what can they do? Well, they do what we do when we're in a foreign place. We watch facial expressions. We listen to tone. Pay close attention to how fast people are moving or their gestures they're making. So for them, it becomes the only way to make sense of the words that you're speaking. And we can do the same when we're paying attention to them. We could pay attention to their facial expressions, to their gestures if they're unable to speak. So I just thought it was kind of a good analogy to think of something that makes sense in our lives when you're traveling and trying to understand a foreign language.
I really love that analogy. You didn't share that with me in our pre-show prep here.
Just came
I,
to me.
but I think it's spot on. Um, and it's I'm trying to think, I'm trying to put myself in that position of I'm in a place where I don't speak the language or understand the language and how that feels. And it's hard to describe how that feels. When I'm traveling on vacation or something like that, it's like I'm not scared per se, but like it's uncomfortable, unfamiliar, maybe
Right.
uncertain, right? To all of that. But then you add something like, you put that into a context of someone who's experiencing dementia, and it could be all that plus fear, right?
Yeah.
Because, like I had conversations with my mom at the early days, like she knew what was happening, right? And she verbally expressed that to me. She was frightened by it, as anyone would be, right? So, but you add, and this is kind of part of what hits me in the heart on this, right? Because
Mm.
if we're caring for someone we love who's living with dementia, and like just the thought of them feeling that way,
Right.
it just like kind of gets you right here, right?
Sure.
But it's just and then from a caregiver's point of view, it's one more really difficult wrinkle to what
Mm.
is probably already, you know, at best a busy day, at
Yeah.
worst a really hard day,
Right.
right? So it's just it's really hard in that sense, but it's worth, I guess, without sort of giving away what we're gonna sort of segue into here in a second, it's worth trying to work through it. Um,
Yeah.
it's so just it's worth it.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I was trying to get to is that it's sort of it's in our nature to try to figure out a way to communicate. So we do, and that's why we do end up using gestures. And, when you lose one thing, so maybe it's you lose the ability to speak, other parts of you become more heightened. So maybe you can hear better or you can feel things more. So I think it's a really great thing for both sides to realize that that's the connector. The connector is what's underneath the words.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So I want to start easing our way into some things. And when I say things, I'm using that term loosely because in certain cases, they are tactics, like things we can actually do,
Mm.
ways we can do, ways we can approach, and we'll get into those. But there's also just a different way of thinking about it, right?
Yeah.
And it starts with understanding what's happening with our loved one. And in addition to what you described around sort of communication skills changing, or in some cases going away, verbal communication skills changing or going away in general, that's not happening in a vacuum, right? So in addition to that, chances are that our loved one living with dementia is like the way they perceive the world around them is changing also,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
you're not it's not always like you're working from the same sheet of music, right?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So if we're relegated to communicating in ways that don't involve words, and we're trying to, like you were in your analogy, you were talking about what you're seeing, sort of what you're feeling, right? Well,
Right.
think about when, someone with living with dementia, like, is sitting on the edge of their bed and they think the throw rug is a hole in the floor, right?
Mhm.
Because of just what's happening to the change, to their what the changes that are happening in their brain, I should say.
Right.
So that just is like a real kick in the gut complicating factor in all of this. It just makes it so much harder. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, what's your take on that combination of sort of decrease in communication skills and change in like how they're seeing the world around them?
I think that we spoke about language and how what they're hearing changes, right? So you're saying, "Mom, let's go out, let's go have dinner." And they're hearing something so foreign, right? So that's the language part of it. The brain has so many changes going on during this. And I think it's the exact same thing for what they see and what they feel and what they smell and what they taste. So everything is different. And it's gotta be so scary and so foreign to them. But I think that's where the perceptions change because they're seeing things that aren't exactly the way that we see them or are feeling things. They might become more sensitive to touch. There's so many things in our senses that change for them.
Yeah. Okay. So I totally agree. But they still know us. I remember I never, like, when my mom at a certain point lost my name, um, putting aside just how difficult that was and emotional that was,
Yeah.
um, thanks to helpful people, like I did come to understand and know to be true the fact that even though she couldn't recall my name in a moment's notice, she knew who I was. I was her
Right.
son. She knew who I was. So let's just put that aside, and I say that to say they know, right? They feel, they know, they still have things to communicate, they want to contribute, right? So a couple of like basic things that I think are a few actually that are really helpful for setting the right tone when we're communicating. When words are a challenge or when they're not. But so keeping this is easier said than done. It was for me anyway, fully admit. But remaining calm and gentle, even
Yes.
when you're frustrated.
Mm.
So, I used to think of it, I had this like amazing librarian when I was growing up. I think of it as like the librarian tone. Just very nice, warm. Always, whether she was smiling or not, it always felt like she was smiling when she spoke to me. Right. So
Yeah.
like keeping calm and gentle.
Yeah. It's so much about the feeling of what you're trying to convey rather than the thing itself. And we're all really good at sensing that, but I think patients along the when your loved one is moving along that progression of the disease, it becomes more and more easy to feel your emotion and see those facial expressions. So that's why you're it's spot on that tone of voice,
Mhm.
calm. And then so no matter what they think is going on, at least they know you're calm. So it's going to be feeding off of you onto them.
Right. Okay. So we established that. So, and these are basic, just kind of fundamental things we want to be doing anytime we're sort of communicating. But you've mentioned touch a couple of times,
Yeah.
asking permission to touch, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Again, it's trying to get at the feeling of, in this case, sort of respect of personal space,
Mhm.
respecting their autonomy, and like giving them agency. Like you're asking them for permission to do something, right?
Yeah, and it's
They
such
know
a
they're
hard thing, I think, if you've been with someone for a long time, and you're just so used to saying what you always did or moving as quickly as you always did in the past. And all of a sudden you have to go, so now I need to get down low and I need to approach it so I'm not scaring them or frightening them. And you always have to have in the back of your mind, they think things are too bright or too loud or too fast. And
Mhm.
you just have to adjust to that.
Yeah. Speaking of, and we had on our note sheet here, avoid threatening behaviors. Well, of course, we're all going to avoid threatening behavior. None of us want to threaten our loved one, but it's really about what you were just saying, Sheila, which is it's taking into account how they may be perceiving the world around them.
Mm.
So even though we might not feel like we're shot out of a cannon walking into the room,
Right.
we might be, right? So like taking that second to sort of reset. And there's lots of other stuff that falls into this, and you alluded to a couple of them, but like positioning when you're communicating, being at eye level and approaching from certain areas, don't approach from the back, things like there's a lot that goes into this. But I think the point in this session that we want to make is just around the, sort of just generally speaking, like these things matter and can set the tone for interactions.
Yeah, and, it's funny because I think we're talking about them seeing our body language or how we're projecting ours, how we're, meeting them,
Mm.
but I also wanna think it's important for us to watch their body language.
Yes.
So, especially if they aren't verbal, let's watch what they're showing us and try to get to that place of where they are. And once again, it comes down to how they're feeling. It's their emotion, if they seem scared. So, it's really being aware of your own body language and watching theirs.
Yeah, and I'm glad you went there because that's where I was gonna go next is,
Hmm.
the just and this gets at trying to think of the best way to say this, but there was for me anyway, I'm not gonna say, everyone's experience is different, but there is, uh, a ton of frustration and
Mm.
anger and just like, I don't know, like,
Yeah.
don't ask me that again, or stop pacing, or I'm trying to think of all the stuff that, the
Mhm.
wandering, but those are what we're seeing on the surface. Behind all of those, and this is really the heart of this topic, in my opinion, but behind all of those are a need or a want or,
Mhm.
a point they want to make. Like
Right.
they're not just, my mom, like when she would have to go to the bathroom, she would be she would just it looked like sort of aimlessly wandering, but oftentimes she was looking for the restroom so she could go
Oh.
right. And it just took me so long to under it took me a long time to figure that out, I guess. And and this is really why I say this is, in my opinion, the heart of this topic is she wasn't just aimlessly wandering because she was bored. She had to use the restroom. She was telling me something with that. Now,
Yeah.
again, it's not simple because I can't say, "Hey, mom, what do you need?" And she'll just answer, I'm looking for the bathroom. I forgot where it was." Like that wasn't an option any longer. So like there's this investigative work and curiosity that needs to be applied to figure out
Yeah.
what that thing is in that moment. Does that make
And,
sense?
yeah, and as a caregiver, you're on tasks all the time. It's like, I have to do this, and then I have to do this. And one of the hardest things is to learn how to pause and bring that curiosity in and assume every single behavior is an inability to express themselves in a way that you're used to.
Mhm.
It is foreign for you too, but I really think it's so important that we slow down and we pay attention. And this goes for so many other areas of our lives, right? It's just like take the time to really see what's going on. And there is always something. And if you start paying attention, you'll see trends. You'll
Yeah.
see that they do this, your mom was pacing right before you realized she had to go to the restroom.
Mhm.
So,
And it
yeah.
was often after me. So we did wound up keeping a log. It was really just a notebook where I was trying to figure out, like, it was happening a lot at a certain point. And I was trying to figure out how, like, trying to understand why it could be happening, what was triggered. But it turns out it was after meals, right?
Yeah.
So no, like rocket science there. Like she had just eaten,
Yeah.
and, half hour and the next hour or so, call it, like she was, anyway, this is the, but you're also getting at something that's really tough about this, because as caregivers, our life doesn't stop. Right?
Mhm.
In my case, yeah, I'm in the sandwich generation. Our kids were young. We had stuff to do. I had work. We had all the different things. And
Mhm.
so it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to pause and observe and be curious, and how, like, it's not so sing-songy. Life doesn't unfold that way.
Right.
Right? So, like, what would you say to someone like me, how I just described myself back then with,
Yeah.
like a million things to do? Like, how can we do that? How can we be as curious as we need to be and as slow as we need to be to
I
help us sort of decode what's being communicated?
I think pick one thing that bothers you most, and try this on a regular basis. And once you get over that hump, like I realized that I paused and I was curious, and now I figured that thing out. So now I'm going to avoid the next 6 months of that happening again and me getting frustrated because I've figured it out. So
Mhm.
I think one at a time, you handle these things. You don't have to try to like fix everything and figure it all out. And I think that's where people get stuck. One little thing, practice that curiosity about that thing. I love how you wrote it down. You started trying to connect the dots, and over time you're going to realize how these small moments of change make big differences. Really big differences over time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is hard to that can be hard to, like, the overtime part can be hard, but the payoff, it's true. It's meaningful.
Mhm.
It does change your life. Like, but I remember wanting instant gratification. Like, I want this fixed now. But something that helped me sort of force myself, regardless of what was going on, to try and slow down, in your words, Sheila, and be curious, in my words, was someone told me once, in without any kid gloves on, I'll say. It was pretty direct feedback. Looking back on it, I'm thankful. But so, well, like, look, Matt, in this case, it's not about you. Like, think about how your mom must feel if she has to go to the bathroom and she can't find it. Or so that shift was helpful for me, just because well, in the context of me, like, stopping what I was doing in the midst of a busy day, like they all are, that was what I needed to, like, to force me to,
Yeah,
because it's, as I said earlier, and I know you feel this way, but, like, just imagine, right? Like, how it would feel if you needed something or wanted something, but you couldn't ask for it.
right, right.
So,
And I just wanted to mention something else because I've heard it several times in the last month, where sometimes caregivers are saying it seems like he does the exact opposite of what I ask him. When I say lift your feet up, he puts them really down hard. When I say I need your hand to help you get your shirt on, he does something else, and then I can't dress him because he's stiff. And that to me is another indication that there's so many, the ask has created a response, but it's the wrong one. And that should be such a clue that there's something off that's just not working in their brain.
mhm.
And to me, that helps you to soften, to go like, oh my gosh, they really can't connect things. So what can I do differently rather than keep asking the same thing? Please put your feet down, or,
Yeah,
stop being so stiff. But it is that sort of softening into realizing their perspective.
I love it. It's Softening is such a good word for it. Okay. So we have a couple minutes left, and I want to, rather than do our normal sort of final thoughts, I'm going to sort of lead us on a final thought.
Love it.
And so the title of this session was Finding Meaning Beyond Words, okay, in dementia. And so we've talked a lot about, let's just call it, like, transactional communication, right? Like, day to day, we're asking them to do something or asking if they need something, like, just that whole thing. But there's a bigger sort of point of view on this. And I felt this way a long time. I read an article in the New York Times. This is going back a couple of years. It was a column from a woman who had cared for her mom, who was living with Alzheimer's disease. I read this, and it just, I was, like, pounding my desk as I was reading it, because I was like, that's how I was feeling. That's exactly
Mhm.
right. And it's this. It's this. She was recounting a story. The author of the column was recounting a story, saying, where one of her friends had said, "Man, you go visit your mom." She was in a memory care community. "You go visit your mom. You spend all this time there, and then you can't understand anything she's saying. Like, how do you do that?" This is the question that the author was asked, and she said, "Well, it's not about what she's saying.
Right. Right.
It's about the time together.
Yep.
And I just wanted to end with that because really that is, to me there's no bigger meaning in all of this, right? We know that caring for someone who's living with dementia who we love is just insanely difficult. But when it's all said and done, it's about the time we have with our loved one. And like that
Right.
is at the root of a lot of what we talk about with caregivers. It's how to we talk about all the tactical stuff, but when it comes down to it, that's what matters most is the time together, the time with
Mm.
the person we're caring for, the time with our mom, with our dad, with our spouse, with our partner, with our cousin, whoever it is we're caring for. It's about the time. That's the meaning, right? And
Connection matters more than words, for
yeah,
sure.
and understanding that for me, like I wasn't caregiving at this point. My caregiving was over when I saw this, but I think when I read it, I identified so much with it. I think I learned it somewhere along the way. I
Mhm.
wish, well, no regrets in caregiving, right? We all do our best, but had I learned it earlier, our life together with dementia would have been better for longer. It's about the time that it's about the time together. That's the real meaning
True.
behind all of this.
Beautiful. Love that.
Okay, so time flies when we're having fun. It's 12:30. We're gonna end now. We do have our November session coming up on the 20th. Changing gears, different topic, very important. We'll be talking about the ins and outs of legal guardianship on November 20th. Tiffany, thank you for dropping that Zoom link into the chat, and also thank you for dropping a couple of resources. Those are articles from Carallel that are gifted to you. So hopefully they touch on a lot of what we talked about here, but hopefully you find those helpful as a takeaway. And with that, Sheila, thank you as always.
Thank you.
All right, thanks Tiffany in the back, and thank you most importantly to everybody for being here.
Take good care.
We're here when you need us. Okay, bye now.
Bye bye.